Buenos días, les rogamos por asiento. Vamos a please have a seat. We will be beginning with our session in a couple of minutes.
Buenos días a todos.
Good morning, everyone.
Vamos ya a empezar nuestro
We'll begin with our last session of this regional conference, and in this panel entitled Interlinked Institutional Frameworks for Social Policy, Opportunities and Challenges of the Single Window, I would like to invite Alberto Arenas to act as moderator of this panel. Good morning, everyone. Thank you very much, Minister Javier Toro, for your introduction. And in this last panel, we will be dealing with the social institutional frameworks, strategic governance and cooperation in times of crisis in cascades. Undoubtedly, ministries of social development are key ministries, and its institutional capabilities must be strengthened in order to respond to the new and challenging demands in an ever-changing world. As we have discussed in previous days, there are different aspects of this institutional framework that are fundamental, and today we want to focus on the need to design strategies that provide feasibility and sustainability to policy proposals, not only during their design, but especially when it comes to seeking agreements for their approval and implementation. And for that purpose, we have a high-level panel in order to discuss these issues. We will be accompanied by María Inés Castillo, Minister of Social Development of Panama, José Carlos Cardona, Secretary of Social Development of Honduras, and he will soon be with us, Laís Abramo, National Secretary for Care and Family of Brazil, Yasna Proboste Campillay, who is a senator, former Minister of Planning and Cooperation, and also former Minister of Education of Chile, Javier Pauline, who is Director General for Social Targeting and Information of the Ministry of Social Development and Inclusion of Peru, and Almudena Fernandez from the UNDP. The guiding questions for this debate are the following. At a regional level, how to promote a dialogue on the exchange of experiences in order to consolidate institutional capacities of ministries of social development faced with limited leadership and with certain internal political weakness, how to benefit from sub-regional spaces and cooperation in order to prioritize the agenda and mandates of the ministries of social development. How to strengthen these spaces in order to construct a governance focused on transparency, accountability, and evidence. How to respond to the reticence or resistance of multiple stakeholders, both internal and external, that provide inexact information and that have prejudices and stigmatizations that often emerge in the public discussion on social policies and the social institutional framework. The panel will be structured in the following manner. Panelists will have 5 minutes in order to share their vision of these questions in a first round, Then we will have a second round, and subsequently we will open up the floor for uh, the participation of participants here. So it's my pleasure to offer the floor to Maria Inés Castillo, Minister of Social Development of Panama. Please go ahead with your 5 minutes, Minister. Good morning, everyone. Thank you very much for this opportunity. I thank ECLAC for this opportunity. I thank the hospitality of Minister Javier Toro and of Chile as a whole. A warm greeting to you, to all you colleagues. In order to enhance the dialogue and the exchange of experiences, in order to consolidate the institutional capabilities and the mechanisms for social development, we need to adopt a regional roadmap to strengthen the public capacities and the innovation of technical and operational tools and the necessary management for a better interinstitutional and intersectorial coordination that timely responds in a timely manner to the needs of the population, such as a single record of beneficiaries, the mechanism to accompany families, the interinstitutional work plans and intersectorial work plans, innovation of monitoring systems and of evaluation systems, and also territorial management of social protection via agreements between the national, regional, and local levels, favoring coordination and the integration of social policies between the different sectors, levels, and functions of government, and the sustainability over time of actions in territories, and in the implementation of strategies to lower multidimensional long-term poverty. I believe that all these aspects are fundamental when the world and our region of Latin America and the Caribbean uh, face certain crises, such as polarization, the impact of the pandemic, demographic changes, the food security and malnutrition, the climate crisis, the acceleration of technological changes, the energy crisis, the increase of the homeless and people suffering from mental health, and also the phenomenon of irregular migration. I would like to reiterate here the what Panama has been inviting the international community to do so that they can take on board in its full magnitude the problem of irregular migration, which is a global crisis, but is something that impacts our country directly. Panama is making enormous efforts in order to cater those irregular migrants in a solidarity fashion, but their number increases every year, and therefore Panama has to devote important resources to this humanitarian aid. As mentioned by our president, this is an unsustainable situation, undesired and inhuman. A humanitarian drama of pain, suffering, and death for hundreds of millions of migrants that cross the Darien Gap, because the Darien Gap, it is not a route or it is basically a jungle where thousands of people are dying. This, which is an unsustainable situation, a situation where we are victims and that we're not responsible for, the problem of irregular migration must be dealt with at a multilateral level, emphasizing the respect for human rights and under the principles of solidarity and shared responsibility, with the purpose of safeguarding the integrity of human life in a safe and orderly manner. Because what we, as ministers of social development in our countries, must uphold as the main priority is to provide our population with dignified living opportunities within their own countries, so that they don't have to migrate in an irregular fashion, exposing themselves to the violation of their human rights and often paying or losing their lives. Inclusive social development, for that purpose, we have different instruments and regional and sub-regional fora that facilitates the task of establishing coordination around commitments that we have entered into, and in order to collaborate and exchange experiences and to enter into long and medium-term experiences. We must be able to share those experiences and have common agendas at a national, regional, and local level. among countries. Another example that I would like to mention to this cooperation is a regional conference of South-South cooperation that becomes a strategic ECLAC entity in order to support the identification of improvement of social protection programs, among them the pillar of care planning, spaces for mutual advice, and horizontal cooperation, and to have strategic and innovating strategies for recovery, resilience, and social development in our region that will help us to advance together along a pathway of cooperation with the priority of protection, social inclusion, and in the efficiency of social investment. Another important space for dialogue and in regional cooperation where we can bring together multilateral efforts for social development is the regional care agenda, facing the impact of crises in cascade that demands a strong action in terms of social policy and especially in terms of social protection, including the care pillar. And I believe that what is also important is to support the generation and the analysis of disaggregated data at a local and regional level, which is crucial in order to develop the experience for the implementation and the monitoring of SDGs, and also to identify those that have been lagging behind when it comes to the achievement of the 2030 agenda. And thus, we are able to face resistance to social policies, the mechanisms for social development with information, transparency, and accountability, which is something that we will discuss in the next block. Thank you.
Muchas gracias, Ministra.
Thank you, Minister Castillo, for this interesting presentation, and thank you very much for being present with us here today. I would also like to mention within this debate the issues of social inequality. And here, of course, we look at the social inequality matrix that Laís Abramo is well aware of, because we're not only talking of revenues, we're talking of all inequalities, and therefore it's important to deal with other groups, people with disabilities, Afro-descendants, indigenous peoples, the migrants that you mentioned. I would like to say that in this year, in our social panorama that will be presented next month, we will devote a significant part of that panorama to labor, the labor inclusion of the migrant population, which is so important. It is a phenomenon that is very present in our region. Well, continuing with the panel, I would now like to offer the floor to José Carlos Cardona. He is the Minister of Social Development of Honduras. So welcome, Minister. Now you have your 5 minutes.
Thank you very much. I would like to start my presentation by explaining the context in which Honduras is inserted today in these issues where we wanted to participate. In fact, because when we came to office 2 years ago, we found this unarticulated society without governance, with an institution that was absolutely divorced from the actions done by the government. So we normally call it as like a narco dictatorship. But the enormous challenge that Xiomara Castro found was the building of a governance and a social institutionality that could give answer to this 74% of the population in extreme poverty in the country, with a 53.5.6 of extreme poverty, and with a non-existent governance, and to put into order a cooperation that we thought and had the idea that they could do their own interventions on social protection without any kind of guideline from the state. First, we built an institutionality focused on governance. The construction of the City Sol is a secretary without execution of a project as a kind of a ruling organization, but with big capacities in terms of research and the building of the social policies. We then had two programs on. One of the challenges was to see how we could address extreme poverty, but without leaving aside the vulnerable groups. So we had a solidarity-based network for wide as spectrum for extreme poverty. So we were then covering more than 83% of extreme poverty. So, and we have this solidarity-based action for 12 groups in vulnerability, including LGTB, First Nations, returned people from asylum, children in a street situation, HIV people, etc. And so the Sol was the coordinator of the whole cabinet. So this governance that was done in 2 years allowed us to privilege the social policies. We found that there was many of them in the state, but we have prioritized 15, one for each of these 12 groups and 5 specific ones for the cross-cutting issues such as education, school feeding, and the social policies that was built together with the CLAC. This has also been key as it allowed us to go to the second level, which is data. One of the big problems of Latin America is the construction of social data that would be functional. Our database, when found, all of them were committed politically because they were based on clientele, as they were then found of a certain political party. And that is why our adversaries, they invested lots of money, but they did not reduce poverty. On the contrary, it was increased. So we surveyed that what was extreme poverty like without political colors, and we could evidence what was the reality in the field. That was key also to understand better the evolution of the country in those 12 years and how we could find mechanisms for articulating the attention to those groups. The building of new social data or updating of this data was useful as well to sit down with the cooperation and to build what we call this ENROPI, the registration of the institutional programmatic program, where we set all the cooperation in the country and we said, well, those are the data and you have to give us what your focuses are in the field so that we can do this interoperability as we need it. The coordination of the cabinet has been key because we have developed some practices and we gave a little bit of administrative hygiene to this social intervention. We cannot, all of us, doing this the same. Let's say all the secretaries addressing the same population with different focus. So the reorientation of the priorities of the cabinet in 18 goals allowed us to put then what our direction was to say, well, this was done in infancy, that was done for young people, that was done for vulnerability with real goals, not very much optimistic in nature, but they will allow us then to pave the road for a specific one. In terms of governance and social institutionality, there has been a key contribution from the United Nations, and particularly ECLAC, UNFPA, the UNDP, etc., have been key, and they have allowed us to transfer their knowledge to us and all this experience in terms of social protection. That the fact that we are here responds to a process that we came to learn, but to understand as well how this can be done and built from outside inwards. And the challenges which are faced in Honduras are are possible then to have this reflection on other countries. So first of all, we need to see what is the optimization of resources and budgets without having new taxes, because our president committed herself not to have more taxes for social protection. So international credit is key now, particularly the international banks that we are building now and new sovereign relationships with new financing parties such as the uh, the internationalization of the Andean of the Andean countries, but the objective as well is to look for universality and to find international funds and the taxes, some ways of financing. We were talking about that as well on the need of fostering that and strengthening that. It's an enormous challenge, the improvement and updating of data, particularly in two areas, which is census and focus. We are at present planning the surveying of the national census of 2024 and the national agrarian one that has not been done for 30 years in Honduras. So this way we can understand then the population dynamics. Anyway, this strategic governance will be a key to face the challenges of climate change and the challenges of the reduction of the demographic bonus and other challenges which are important for Latin America, but we are tuned up with everything the other Latin American countries are experiencing. Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Secretary of State on Social Development, Jose Carlos Cardona, and we thank your presence and ECLAC as well. And we wish all success in implementing these policies of social protection and the law of social protection that you are fostering, and obviously success in that, and obviously as well the intention of having this role of non-contributive pensions in Honduras. Next, I would like then to give the floor to a person from the house. Let's say all the authorities here present, obviously can feel this as your own house, but she was the director of social affairs and responsible of working with the matrix of social reality. She was working in Mexico in the third meeting in this regional agenda that all the member countries then approved. And so we were talking about the national National Secretary for Care and Family, Laisa Bramo. Good day to everybody. I want to thank your words, which really I feel myself at home here. And I really wanted to start my 5 minutes by talking of one of the issues that is on these questions, the role of the regional and under-regional spaces and the strengthening and sustainability of policies and the social institutionality in our countries. I think that the most important example of that in social development is precisely this conference. And more than that is the agreement from the beginning of the building of it between ECLAC and UNDP to take this conference and the Forum of Ministers to take them into the future to implement it. And the idea is that we, in this forum, we are developing trust, a permanent space of exchange, cooperation. I think that this is key. And I also think that in Brazil, as you have heard by our ministry and by Leticia Bartolo, Brazil has been out of it. And now we came back now. As President Lula says, Brazil came back and we are building a process of reconstruction today. So we were absent as a country during this sad period of our history, but anyhow, the presence of this institutionality, this regional institutionality has been key, both in the good moments and good in which we have contributed as Brazil to this process, as well as when we wanted to stop the process somehow. I wanted to highlight particularly the agenda, which is still is a roadmap that has been mentioned here as a reference for all the discussion, for all these documents that have been commented here. But Alberto, you have just borrowed this issue a little bit, and the ministry as well talked about inequality, and I think the same notion of inclusive social development and the metric of the social support and services is to put then all this into the center of the agenda, which is something that has been worked out in this house with this vision. Is not only the inequality of income, which is a key, but we are talking about as well inequality of income or classes, if you want to be still stronger in the definition, but it's also race. It involves race. It involves Afro-descendant population, which is constituting part of our region, as well as the these inequalities which are reproduced, in fact. So the territorial inequalities are well central in our country. That is to say, there is no policy that could be effective and efficient without considering and staying beyond the average, without considering the different characterizations of the territories with its own peoples, its own characteristics. So territory, age, cycle of life, of migration, all this set of different factors is central. And it's central as well the idea that without a determined vision, it will not be possible to guarantee development. Not possible either to take this or to retake this road. And as our president was very emphatic, he said in the United Nations 20 years ago, I said that our main point was to combat hunger. Hunger came back into Brazil. We have to still fight, but the idea is to fight inequalities today. I was lost myself in time, but I wanted to mention two other things in this area. In the case of the national policies of care, which is the policies that I am responsible for today, has been key as well, something that has been said as well by Jose Carlos Cardona, which is the integration of the agencies of the United Nations system. I think this is key. There is a lot of the strength, a lot of power, lots of experience accumulated and working jointly central. From the beginning of our construction of the policy, we've had a fundamental support from the United Nations, and this is linked to the South-South cooperation, because this is a space for exchange experiences that has been central. We have been discussed that in the parallel or in the side event, that are roads that are cross each other, and this had to do with the vision that we have on our country, but also with the fundamental platform, which is the United Nations. They are working on that. And finally, I just wanted to highlight as well, by talking specifically on the national policy on care, the central role of other three subsidiary agencies of CLAC, which is the Conference of Women, that has been pioneering in defining this road in terms of care, the Conference of Population and Development, and the Consensus of Montevideo, with an important role by talking about the different sectors of the population, and the Conference of the Statistics of the Americas, which is the one that has fostered the different surveys, the statistics, broken down by sex, etc., which are fundamental in order to come there are fundamental for goal 17 something that talks about the need of having the statistics broken down, which are very useful in order to elaborate policies that would then efficient and coherent. Thank you very much.
Muchas gracias.
Thank you, Secretary. And I would highlight the emphasis because this year we have wanted to talk about the institutional framework of the Ministries of Social Assistance, and we have added governance. Governance implies the capability to implement and not only the technical design, but also those policies that deal with poverty and inequality mentioned by Secretary Abramo, and especially highlight this forum because at the end of the day, this is also institutionality. This regional conference is institutionality, and one of the things that we require is this institutional framework, and I'm sure that we will be able to continue to build this. This involves cross-cutting agreements so that with different common minimum aspects that we share, we will enter into cross-cutting agreements so that we can advance towards inclusive social development, as mentioned by Secretary Abramo, that primarily puts people at the center of development strategies. Thank you, Lais. Well, moving ahead, I'd now like to invite Javier Paulini, Director General for Social Targeting and Information of the Ministry of Social Development and Inclusion of Peru. Javier, please, you have 5 minutes. Good morning once again. I'm very happy to be able to participate in this discussion. I would like to focus my participation on 2 issues that form part of the questions. The first one is to reiterate the proposal that was submitted yesterday in terms of establishing a network of social records. But I believe that this goes beyond that. These coordination spaces help to discuss longer-term policies. However, I do believe that we must have a more operative type of mechanisms for continuous daily exchanges. These regional networks to exchange may be helpful in this task. We have created a chat with those responsible for social records, and that is very useful. Often we have questions related to the implementation of some of the policies that we are promoting in our countries, and to listen to the experience of what others are doing, the direction in which they're heading, is tremendously enriching, and it helps to establish roadmaps or in order to avoid venturing in some efforts. So we need longer-term policies and agreements. Let us imagine that day-to-day communication via virtual seminars every 2 months, for example, exchanging experiences, or with a virtual library that enables us to share evaluations about these aspects. But this should not only exist for ministries of social development. There are many other common programs. We have food programs, for example, conditioned transfers in many countries, and these spaces could also operate for those initiatives. There are operational initiatives that we should explore in order to make these policies, to provide continuity to these policies. Now, based on the experience of the Ministry of Social Development and Inclusion of Peru, I would like to refer to how to strengthen this. Our experience is that if we do this as from the national government, this is not really or truly sustainable. What we have therefore done is to work with our regional and local governments. And for this purpose, what is it that we need? Well, we require a clear policy. We have a national social development and inclusion policy, and we recently updated that. And what we do is precisely to bring that policy to the fore in these spaces, because the idea is not to impose that, but rather to establish a dialogue. So to determine how local governments, municipalities, we have 1,891 municipalities, how they take these guidelines on board, how those strategic axes of the policy can be implemented in each one of their realities. So we have created scope for coordination both at a regional and local level. Imagine that out of the 1,891 municipalities in our country, we have more than 1,000 coordination efforts in our country that are coordinating the implementation of these policies. And the ministry also supports the implementation of some mechanisms that favor that coordination. We have a fund, a promotion fund for local governments, so we can align some of the issues put forward by our policies so that jointly and in coordination we can truly achieve those goals. And likewise with local governments, we have a non-monetary stimulus, which is a seal, and that means that municipalities that help us most with the implementation of these strategic aspects are acknowledged and receive acknowledgement on the part of the ministry for helping the implementation of these policies. As I have mentioned, there are coordination and local entities that are already in place and that work, and that means or that helps policies to become policies that are shared by all stakeholders in the territory, and not only as from the central level, that they are known and that they are provided with a much more local emphasis. That is fundamental, and that is the message in terms of the implementation that we have promoted as from our ministry, and that we believe supports the sustainability of policies. Thank you very much.
Muchas gracias, Javier, por
Thank you, Javier, for this presentation and for your participation in side events and for bringing to the fore something that emerged in yesterday's debate in terms of the importance of information systems in the social institutional framework. We have proposals in that sense, and we have said that information systems is the vertebral column of social protection systems. They clearly help decision-making, monitoring, and evaluation, and clearly they also contribute towards a technical consensus and support political consensus to make headway with social protection policies and public policies, because when we talk based on our figures, that helps us to enter into these cross-cutting agreements. So thank you very much for your presentation. Now I'd like to invite Honorable Senator Yasna Proboste Campillay, Senator of Chile. She is a former minister of different ministries of Chile. She is the ex-president of the Senate. It's a great pleasure to have you here in ECLAC. Senator, you have 5 minutes. Thank you. Thank you very much. Very good morning. I would like to thank the invitation to participate in this regional conference on social development. And I would also like to tremendously thank the fact that this activity is held today, a 5th of October, which is a date in which we commemorate 35 years of the result of the triumph of the plebiscite in our country that was held in 1988, which was the end of a process that organized society through social organizations, through student organizations, through workers' organizations, and through society as a whole, were able to defeat a bloody dictatorship such as the one that we suffered in our country, a brutal dictatorship, and that left our country with profound wounds, but not only that, with a very complex situation from the viewpoint of poverty. I heard the Secretary of Social Development of Honduras, and that would seem to be the situation that is always present whenever we face dictatorships. And based on our experience, we acknowledge the importance of the institutional framework as a basis for governance, for sustainable development, and for equitable development as well. And that is why this conference also enables us to establish what it is that we always seek, which is to ensure and not to go back in what we have done. And this related to what Liza said, to suffer a setback. And that is what institutional framework is there for, to strengthen democracy around solid foundations so that our civilizing progress is not just an ephemeral event of one single administration, but rather so that we're capable not only of having good seasons of government, so to speak, and we have experienced that with people that are here. Alberto, for example, played an important role, always supporting social protection policies. What we expect is that we don't only have a good season, so to speak, but a good historical development as a country, and the social policies are go hand in hand with the demands of the majority of our population. We hope that this will become a true historical development in terms of social policy in a world where crises seem to permanently appear. Climate crisis, migration crisis, as mentioned by the Minister of Social Development of Panama. What seems to be ever present is the reflection around the social institutional framework and reflections around a strategic, more collaborative governance. That becomes more imperative than ever, and therefore all the efforts conducted by UN agencies in this sense is tremendously important. This interconnection of crises in areas that encompass public health and the economy and the environment and others evidences that the maintenance of the status quo is not a feasible option for our countries. And in consequence, what has become what we need is to rethink how our societies and how our government systems are able to communicate with each other and respond to the deficits that often exist with regard to citizens' confidence in terms of honesty, decentralization, equality, citizens' participation, and others as a latent reality both in our country and in Latin America as a whole. So, within this context, the production of social policies and its close relationship with the construction of social protection systems based on human rights that prioritize the welfare of people as the central aspect of actions that must that of government action become the essential foundations upon which we will achieve progress and equality in our societies. These policies must not only seek to improve the quality of life of the population, but also guarantee the rights of individuals, generating a solid basis for development and social justice. At present, the challenges for our country and for countries in Latin America undoubtedly are linked to the implementation of protections systems with a rights approach. And this is a lesson that we have learned, capable of providing guarantees that are basic for welfare in different contexts. This obviously implies the ability to enter into social agreements in our country, also fiscal agreements that enable the definition of challenges, of priorities, and of medium and long-term goals, because these are permanent investments that we must make in our countries, and this also requires permanent financing.
Therefore, we have to be able to make sustainable that all the resources to finance in a progressive way, all these initiatives can be guaranteed. And obviously, Alberto Arenas can talk about that as he has been the very important architect in those processes, in those systems of social protection without considering the particular point and specificities that the territories have in each of our countries. But we should be able to uh, to address all these vulnerabilities that we find all along um, all along the life of those initiatives. And obviously, the ones that we are more proud of are the ones of social protection that we went to look for those families that were excluded, to establish elements and minimum conditions to guarantee them in education, in health, housing, access to justice, labor, etc. And facing the risks derived from the economical situation that are along the cycle of life, they find themselves, and they have to address that. But the thing is how we can guarantee that from birth. So that is why our program Chile Grows With You takes them from birth or from pregnancy up to the higher education, tertiary education. As our director of UN Women said, we have to address the inequalities, not only those based on origin, but also those on gender, etc. It's important then to guarantee opportunities that allow us to face the crisis, such as the one we have lived very shortly ago, particularly this one on health, that was obviously a very harmful period that for many women, they lost their jobs. This policy of care then that should be based on the state is on the burden on the shoulders of many women. So we need to establish stability in the employment, in the working conditions, and the need of knowing new capacities, and this capacity that we have in the different countries to implement the social policies is determining to face those crucial problems such as vulnerability, poverty, migration, and inequality. So thank you very much for this invitation and for the work that each of you and us are working in our countries. Thank you. Senator Proboste, thank you very much for your intervention, and thank you once again for your presence here. I really want to point out of your words that there is a minimum common denominator, which is the social institutionality, important to take it to the fore and give it so that it can be then well protected. And the idea of putting the emphasis on this social protection from birth, yeah, because we put people on the center with a focus on rights and the cycle of life from birth up to the elderly. And I want to close with an issue that you talked about as well, how we come from a good season to a good trajectory. And we have a big challenge on this trajectory. This summit on the social development in 2025, that this regional platform is to contribute to those agreements in order to have a good trajectory and not only a good season. Thank you, Senator. Now, with lots of pleasure, I'm going to give the floor to our mates, people who have been working with us all together. We have been working for an inclusive social development in the region. And today in the morning, we have Almudena Fernandez. Yes, Almudena Fernandez, the head economist for UNDP. Please, your 5 minutes. Thank you, Alberto. President, Secretary, ministries, authorities of government, and my colleagues of the United Nations. As the title says, Latin America are in a moment of crisis. We're still facing the effect of pandemic, and the cost of food, climatic emergency. That is to say, we're still in a moment of relative emergency. Nevertheless, it is important as well to highlight that the region and the world as a whole are in a moment in which there could be potential opportunities. We are in a moment in which we see that there is a series of transitions that are occurring grouped differently. For example, an ecological transition, a technological one, and a demographic and social as well that obviously are giving us or are presenting some challenges that can affect our productivity as a country and this sustainable development in the region, but it requires that they should be then well focused, and this requires actions, concrete actions. So the message is that then addressing the challenges and channel them will require an effective governance that put people in the center. We see that in many occasions, and as many countries are still working in an emergency mode, let's say there is a need to respond to immediate needs. Obviously, will make us a little bit change in our vision. But the idea is, if we want to go to good trajectories, we need to take actions today with a medium and long-term vision, not only looking at the immediate point, but these places for integration, for communication, for debate, such as this one, as well as the World Forum on the SDGs that was held in New York some weeks ago, is a places where we can then see what our challenges and what are the roads to continue or to continue working. What are these possible light in the middle term, in the medium term, and in the long term? So, and we can see what are different what our goals, which is our vision of what we want for Latin America and the Caribbean. And in these last days, we have seen lots of examples of different issues that were not in the agenda, but today we can share successes, advancements as well. For example, policies on care. Many countries have advanced significantly in these issues as a part of this universal social system protection. 5 years ago, those was not present, such as, for example, the case of Honduras said that how we can then update our registration in order to have a more integral vision of social protection, and as well as the authority from Peru saying that these networks, which are not only these spaces that we give ourselves on every year, but on a daily basis, we should be working as well where this technical capacity would have a place where ideas can be discussed and shared. And from UNDP and the NOE, CLAC as well, we are very willing to continue creating these spaces as well. Another important issue to mention go beyond the national frontiers, let's say climate change, regulation of the new technologies that we see that they are emerging so quickly, difficult to understand, such as artificial intelligence, etc., as well as the different composition of human beings in our places. So they go beyond our frontiers, and we need to have agreements in regionally, and that obviously can have then a good space in the global sphere as well. So we need to institutionalize all these dialogue places and rooms in order to understand what is the role of the national sphere and the regional sphere. It is also very important to make sure that we can have a solid institutionality at the national level and to have strong resilient, transparent, and effective tools in order to face and to address the crisis of today and the future. That they should have financing, human capacities, technical capacities to face all these challenges. And as the Secretary of CEPAL said, that they would have this prospective capacity, imagining what the future will be like, so that we can mold the future the way we want, and not just to react to what will happen to the future. So these opportunities is not exclusively for the different governments. It should be then taken as a big thing in order to create consensus, and cooperative focus will allow us to respond to the multidimensional challenges and to foster resilience and cooperation in our region. Thank you very much. Thank you, Almudena, for this intervention and the different points to pinpoint, but I will just dwell on one of them, because it's clear that when we think of our system of social protection in all our institutionality, the first derivative that we think of is to address inequality and poverty, as Senator Provosta said. But this is the first derivative, but it's a context of transformation, productive ones, climatic ones, disaster, demographic ones, epidemiological ones, as well as nutritional, and even technological, that effectively then they would place us into a context of crisis, and it creates challenges which are so much different from the first derivative. The first derivative is in the heart of us, but we're in this area of transformation. That is why we have put into the debate the strengthening of a social institutionality to continue with the road that the ministries have already taken. We are fantastic on time. So we will go for the second round of 3 minutes, each of you, so that we can then continue with the same order. And then the presidency will take the floor if there will be intervention from the delegations. So, Minister Castillo, please, your last 3 minutes.
Para fortalecer la institucionalidad social.
In order to strengthen the social institutional framework, the issue that we're discussing in this conference, to strengthen governance and to achieve the confidence of our population, we are committed to information, transparency, and accountability. And as we say, data supports words, and for that we need to provide scientific evidence with measurement instruments of existing poverty in our country, making that open, accessible, and making that information open, accessible, and timely for the social action of the state at the different levels, which is fundamental in order to measure and report the progress achieved by our country in the achievement of sustainable development goals, among others, and also generating coordination opportunities, something that we have discussed, and the need that all our countries have in the region of Latin America and the Caribbean in terms of having evidence and concrete data. I would like to share with you the summary of the SDGs. I am part of the presiding officers of that entity, and within the framework of the SDG summit during the General Assembly, evidence was established through SDG studies, and this summary that may be a roadmap, may become a roadmap for our countries, provides. We have a roadmap for SDG 17, and I invite you to form part of this coalition, which would be important in order to improve compliance and the achievement, basically, of the 2030 agenda. We also face the challenge of promoting new processes, prioritizations, and effective targeting with inclusive participation in order to strengthen confidence and legitimacy, making an effort to include groups and communities that have been traditionally excluded, as mentioned here, such as our native peoples, Afro-descendant population, people with disability, and to benefit from new technologies for citizen participation. In Panama, what we did was to establish the Plan Colmena strategy as the main program to struggle against poverty and inequality, and that is our main accelerator for the implementation and for bringing down to earth into our territories the SDGs in Panama, and also promoting those territorial development processes, enhancing public policy and the institutional framework of the state in areas of poverty and vulnerability. With Plan Colmena, we have set the foundations to generate structural transformations in territories and guarantee the right to development, and to encourage an inclusive, effective institutional framework that is also participative and representative, and that promotes the coordination and the alliances between public entities, civil society, academia, the private sector, and the community, so that people feel that they are participating in the process aimed at developing their communities. And then what is also very strategic is to advance towards the strategies and protect the processes that we have achieved, which provides stability to social protection systems, and to foresee intersectorial coordination mechanisms for their implementation. For example, the creation of high technical level standards and consultative entities for citizen consultations and for accountability. We must work and uphold policies upon a solid institutional framework capable of generating conditions for the design, implementation, monitoring, and evaluation, and that with proven evidence is able to create a positive impact in terms of the reduction of poverty and inequalities in the region, improving the living conditions of all our populations, and likewise to promote the importance of solidarity and multilateral cooperation, establishing alliances and intensifying the contributions of all stakeholders for the full, effective, and accelerated implementation of the 2030 agenda, which is a fundamental task. And for that purpose, as mentioned here, as all of us have mentioned here, we must work in order to seek out practical ways of cooperation, so that we can share our experiences, so that our technical teams may also share their own experiences. And this is a way in which we will be able to strengthen and improve our social institutional framework. And as I always say, in our country, and we work close in hand with all UN agencies, but as we talk about the coordination between institutions at the level of each country, I believe that it is also important to establish coordination of the different UN agencies in order to avoid redundancy and improve the effectiveness of cooperation. I believe that what is also important when it comes to these challenges and opportunities that we face, I believe that ECLAC is the agency that can support us, as from the institutional frameworks, as from social development mechanisms, in order to establish that dialogue with the various ministers of finance. Because if we face a challenge as from the social institutional framework, it is indeed the financing of the different programs that we implement. And there, I believe, ECLAC becomes a vital, a very relevant stakeholder to generate that dialogue. And Panama, of course, is very willing to form part of the presiding officers of the conference on the regional conference on social development. Thank you very much. Thank you, Minister Castillo. I don't know if you understood well. Welcome to the presiding officers, Chile and the rest of the countries. We will, of course, welcome you. And I highlight two things very quickly. This entity, this regional conference, this platform must indeed become a coordinator, must form part of that institutional framework that is of help It is not by chance that in our position document, we mentioned several dimensions, and one of them is the financial dimension, because we understand that the financial dimension also forms part of the process of production of social development ministries, because if we understand that that dimension belongs to others, and the only thing that we do is to receive resources, clearly we will only be receiving 3.4% of total public expenditure. In order to grow, we need that financial dimension to grow. And secondly, I take on board the issue related to the coordination of UN agencies. Just as we ask ministries of finance and ministries of social development to coordinate themselves, obviously, we must make an effort to establish that coordination and to offer a coordinated supply of products to the country. So thank you, Minister, for being here and for your participation. Now I'd like to offer the floor to Minister Cardona. In this second round, I would like to deal with some issues that I believe are common challenges that we face as a region, and that we should outline and see how we form part of other entities or within the framework of this conference, how we build an agenda for joint work. My colleagues have already said that we need to coordinate that, because what the work with the UN has shown is that we can work jointly beyond the storms, so to speak, that we all face in our own countries. First of all, the feasibility of the SDGs and how to achieve them. Obviously, the 2030 agenda is not going to be achieved fully, and therefore perhaps we could establish certain measurable goals around some indicators that were profoundly modified during the pandemic, such as the school dropout rate, the issue of the population that fell into extreme poverty. We need an environmental vulnerability indicator for each country, and the major issue that we face today is the process of regional migration that is impacting the way in which socio-demographic dynamics are evolving far quicker than the institutional capability. María Inés Castillo already said that Panama, and especially the Central American Isthmus, is facing a tremendous challenge with its population. In Honduras, we receive 3,500 people in our borders every week, and we believe that other illegal border points receive another 7,000. So we're saying that every week 7,000 people cross Honduras towards the US. The Darien Gap involves a very large number of people. What we don't know, the level of social vulnerability that these people have when they reach Honduras, which is 3 countries later. And the regression of these people and those that stay as temporary or permanent residents. The other issue is the financing of social protection programs in Honduras today. Well, the ministries of finance are never close friends of ministries of social development, and we don't need to be friends, but we have to find common points. And one of the arguments that we have found in Honduras, and which is fantastic, is that social protection is not an expenditure, but rather an investment. I would like to share with you, and I don't feel all that proud of the achievement, that the role of the social cabinet in the latest negotiation with the IMF was fundamental to enter into a final agreement with the IMF, totaling $800 million for Honduras. You have no idea how difficult it was to convince them that what we were going to invest in social development was not an expenditure, but an investment. How the struggle against poverty and against vulnerability as a result of various reasons and extreme poverty, if we cater for that in a strategic and targeted and intelligent manner, is capable not only of reducing the levels of poverty, but also capable of generating assets. The assets-based perspective of our solidarity network, what it seeks is precisely to reinsert populations living in extreme poverty into the economy. Convincing the IMF was a gigantic 2-week-long task, and they even mention this in their report. And I don't feel proud of this because, logically enough, we're not such good friends of the IMF. But one of the challenges that we all face here is how to convince the technicians and the people that manage the money that this is not an expenditure, but rather an investment for the future. And if we do this intelligently, we can indeed improve even the socio-economic conditions of our own countries. And finally, the issue of vulnerable childhood. And I think we all have a problem of taking kids back to school after the pandemic. President Castro confirmed that she will go to Paris to the World Coalition, an entity of the United Nations, and we have shown that 2.3 million out of the 3 million children that we have are receiving school meals, and that has implied an increase of 90,000 children per year. In 2 years, we already have 180,000 children that have rejoined the school system as a result of school meals. And so to review initiatives for children as a democratizing process is very important, because at the end of the day, if children are linked to the public services such as education, at the end of the day implies democracy, and therefore we must focus our attention on that point. And finally, climatic and environmental vulnerability, which is a very, very severe problem in Honduras, for example, as from the hurricanes in 2020, in the midst of the pandemic, we have faced the situation of many internally displaced persons, because we have discovered that people living in extreme poverty do not migrate domestically. This domestic migration is in the level of poverty. It is the poor that create these caravans of people that go to the US. So this population that we are protecting with our solidarity network will escape the extreme poverty level and will become poor. And we're concerned that they again will want to migrate to the US. And that is one of our problems, because the main valley, the industrial valley of Sula, becomes flooded every year or suffers from floods every year. And the state has no capability to reestablish the infrastructure that is damaged every year as a result of climatic vulnerability. And this in rural and poor areas leads to greater vulnerability. And therefore, we must pay attention to better monitor how we face up to this. In Chile, you recently suffered from floods, and this is something that means that we are evidencing that our capability as a state to respond not to the emergency as such with food, with transfers and so on, but our ability to be able to return to a situation in terms of infrastructure and physical and social conditions, enabling that population to remain in that areas and not to migrate. 288 municipalities are in Honduras, and more than 200 lack drinking water because the water systems built 20 years ago are no longer sustainable. Our basins have dried up, and I know that you're also facing that reality. And vulnerable populations without water implies immediate extreme poverty, and we have many other barriers that we have to face, and therefore, with regards to these 5 points, I believe that we face many challenges as a region, and that we must establish joint coordination so that within the framework of the SDGs, we can determine what it is that we can do by 2030 and after that. Thank you.
Muchas gracias, Ministro Cardona.
Thank you very much, Minister Cardona, for your words. I got those points, many points that are to be pinpointed here, but I just want to take one of them, and which really Mr. Cardona interprets as when he says that investing in social protection is not only expenditure, and this is an investment, an intelligent investment, because investing in social in this area is obviously something which is inefficient, because it generates social problems, but it generates productivity problems as well as in the economy. It generates problems, as it was commented here. by all your authorities here. So all the processes of migration that we are experiencing in the region so far, so that that's our investment here hasn't got to do only with the SDGs. We have to go out from our conferences in order to include other people in this so that we can have more and more resources for social protection. Thank you, Minister Cardona, for your presence here. And now we go to Secretary Abramo. Lais, you have your 3 minutes for your close. Thank you very much. When we were talking here, I go back to the initial question, what we can do so that the objectives can be sustainable in time, and having these results based on trajectory, that this policy would become then state policy, because we know that the problems that we face are quite profound, are structural in nature. So there should be then a really important effort. As I have few minutes, I think there are 3 central points that are in the discussion of the institutionality, and by looking from a point of view of a federal country, such as Brazil and Mexico, Colombia, several in Latin America that are structured federally. And I was to point 5 issues: the need of the intersectorial dialogue, the interfederation, that is to say, in between the different levels of the government, as well. This coordination, the dialogue with the legislative power, I think is key, and the instances of consultancy and communication of results and impact. This is key. Then to strengthen policies and to continue working and advancing in the acts, in the contracts with the society. How then universal social protection is not just an idea, but they should be incorporated by the citizens, as this is the way of advocacy as well, and making sure of what we're doing. Many other things, and I don't have time enough, but from the point of view of the policy that we are building on family care, which is a new policy, as we said yesterday, to Brazil is a little bit late to this agenda, but is being benefited by the advancement of other countries in the system of the United Nations. But this care policy, as the big plan Brazil with no hunger that was launched by President Lula in Brazil, well, the MDS has got a fundamental role of organization and articulation together with the Ministry of the Women, but it cannot be structured without a deep dialogue with the other areas of government, for example, health, education, citizenship, housing, etc., because those are policies which are in different ministries. And therefore, this articulation is central. Likewise, as I said before, we cannot do politics without being based on the territories. So this interfederation relationship is ruled by law. There are systems, for example, the system of health, the system of social affairs, which is nationwide covering, but it's got to be articulated democratically so that these policies can be taken to everywhere. Because in the central government we have the big ideas, but if the municipality is not executing, implementing that in a coordinated way, it does not occur. The dialogue with the legislative power, we know how central it is, and how then the structuralization of a policy with a transforming character of the relationships on gender, for example, is very important. For example, in our case, Brazil, which is a very conservative country, so we need efforts, articulation, capacity of dialogue, etc. And lastly, and so still 2 more points. I still have got time. So in the case of the care policy, we didn't want to start with a bill because it was first needed to start working with the government to understand what is a care for social protection, for education, for health. Is not exactly the same. So we have to be coordinated in order to elaborate something which is coherent, which is part of what is already existent, and obviously considering the different gaps to articulate the different policies on care. But in the Congress of Brazil, there are some proposals of bills which are not necessarily with the same vision. So how we do this demands a big effort on articulation, and we know that in many occasions this even can be an impediment for the execution and implementation of policies. I think that in all those countries we have different examples. So dialogue as well in those systems that I mentioned before. There are legal definitions that there should be the national councils, the national conferences on public policies in Brazil, which is not only 3 days of a conference, but it's a whole process that comes from the municipality, goes to the state, up to the national government, and those are fundamental as well to gather all the visions and the requests from the population to then strengthen what are the results going to be like. So those are processes that are being rebuilt so far in Brazil, but they are crucial. And communication, lastly, I think that all countries suffer the same. How the governments can communicate the results, communicate the intentions, and to have a dialogue, effective dialogue, within this period of permanent fake news that in which attacks are being received all along the day. So this is generalized, and obviously arguments, narratives, data, evidences are key, are crucial, and I think that there is a space for collaboration among us. That is to say, well, it is just 0.1% of the GDP sufficient enough to go out of the poverty, which is the expenditure, the social expenditure, or the comparison of the social investment, what is lost with the fiscal evasion, for example. The same happens with the satellite account. So those are evidences, in fact, which are very important. I think that showing what happens in other countries is key as well. But how we communicate that to the citizens. In some countries, the main media, they have different visions. So, and I would put this as well on the table as another challenge of this strengthening of the social policies. Thank you very much. Thank you, Secretary Abraham. Important is a mention of communication that you mentioned many occasions, the processes of reform that are taken forward. So they need communication, not only the design, the technical design, but also basically how they can be explained to the population, and as well as looking for those supports. Something that we mentioned yesterday in the side event on care and social protection, what is then, or how important is then to progress on a national policy, integral policy of care within the framework of these systems of social protection. How important is this linkage being done within this the framework of this system, so that there are synergies and scale economies that are in the systems, then they can go progressing and walk hand in hand. Director Paulini, you have the floor now for your 3 minutes. Well, thank you very much. And once again, I think that this is an issue of reflection as well. In many occasions, we are asked when formulating projects of investment or any kind of a strategy we are asked to have a value change. They do not say what they don't. They're not expressing exactly what is the objective or the products that we're giving, the inputs, etc. And sometimes we do it so mechanically because we have just to comply with a structure or a date, but we do not understand well. And I think that this is my reflection, in fact, that this is key, is crucial, vital to consolidate effectively a strategy for sustainability as well. Because I think that we are to be clear in terms of what we want to solve effectively, and the building of all these value chains, the identification, clearer identification of those objectives. What are the things or the products that we are going to be delivering to the citizens? What is the immediate results? What will be then the contribution to bigger results, etc. will be like. So I think it's basic, not only that the ruling entity would know that the idea, and this is the practice that we have implemented in our ministry, is that all players should know this chain and they see how from their intervention they can contribute to bigger results. They would know exactly well what is the role of them. Best part of the products are products and results which are fragmented in the social intervention. The result is not only gotten with only one step. We share roles with education, with health, with housing. I think that this is a fundamental point, and this all this based on the experience that we have had in Peru. One of the things that is recognized in Peru is the success we've had in the infant malnutrition, particularly because we started from this. We were clear in terms of which were the results that would contribute to this policy for reducing this malnutrition in infants. We know that there are three specific results and how these are linked, for example, to access to water and how they are organized and coordinated to have actions linked to this field from a bigger focus. I think this has been vital in the Peruvian case. And by taking the reflection as well, this wouldn't have been possible were it not for, as we say in Peru, for a public kind of management with a debate in mass media as well. I think it was impressive seeing how before nobody was talking about this chronic malnutrition in infants, but today this is one of the most important issues in mass media. Malnutrition, anemia, for example. This has been a work done. This is not for free. So we have gone to each of the different fora, even in academia as well. There has been a comment on the important role of this. So there is a role as well in academia, by the way, in institutions of cooperation, in identifying this evidence. Yesterday, we were sharing a research on the economical impact, for example, of malnutrition. It's impressive to see how in Peru and other countries, it's impressive to see how there are so important economical costs involved. And this is the information to be delivered to the citizens so that we as a whole can see that these preventing strategies can help us to save all these costs. It's important to have these clear messages towards the citizens. I remember that many of the discourses were talking about that this is the basic stage, let's say from 0 to 3 years old, basic for the development of the brain of the children. And this is to be addressed with clear messages. What needs a car, for example, is a high octane gasoline. This is what your child needs at this stage of life. It's important for the citizens to understand how important it is to intervene then in this case. And this promotes consensus. I think that we really have to consider that this communication to mass media towards the citizens is basic and crucial to generate this consensus-like agenda and among the public servants as well, knowing that we are contributing to bigger issues from our specific place. Thank you very much.
Muchas gracias, director Paulini. Muchas gracias por su presencia.
Thank you, Director Paulini, for your presence here in ECLAC. Indeed, I would like to highlight out of the issues that you have mentioned, your study on hunger and the double burden. Here in ECLAC, we have a long tradition of conducting studies in the Social Affairs Division. Rodrigo Martinez has conducted these studies, and he is also the coordinator in the Social Affairs Division, the regional conference on social development. So thank you very much for your participation and for making reference to that. Honorable Senator Jasna Proboste, now you have your 3 minutes to close. Thank you very much. I am tempted to speak for longer. Having heard you all, it is clear that we cannot exclusively rely on economic growth to resolve challenges in terms of welfare. This is not automatic. The more growth doesn't automatically mean greater welfare. On the contrary, we require social policies that are active, but we also need to have a solid institutional framework enabling an increase and a more efficient and lasting impact of social policies with this perspective of social protection in our country and in Latin America and impacting the living conditions of communities. For me, it is very satisfying to listen to diverse speakers in this panel and to evidence how much progress ministries of social development have achieved in the continent over the past few years and how legislation has also been updated and created an adhesion to international treaties. Today, we have heard challenges that are common challenges in terms of SDGs, and there we have organizational structures that are far more robust and beyond the difficulties in the relationships between ministries of finance and ministries of social development. And no one today argues about the need to have solid social development ministries and the coordination that must exist both within governments and with civil society. And that is indeed what creates the solid nature of the institutional framework so that this can be of vital importance for the life of people. At the end of the day, one asks oneself, well, why do we need to make progress in terms of social policies? And the most essential answer is that we need to make progress in terms of social cohesion in our countries. We need to guarantee and promote the fundamental rights of people in our societies. In addition, the fact that we have solid institutional frameworks when it comes to social development also enables us, as from governments, to be accountable to the community and to promote their confidence at a time when we very clearly experience this crisis of confidence, and promote a more active participation on the part of citizens in the construction of a future that is much more equitable, much more prosperous, so that we can recover the meaning of remaining in their own country, and the institutional framework and the quality of that institutional framework is fundamental for the state and for the behavior of citizens, because as has been mentioned here, we must be capable of guaranteeing that all citizens are aware and are able to exercise their rights with a voice and in spaces where they're able to express themselves with mechanisms that enable their incorporation into political making, into policy making spaces. Government must be transparent and make a better use of social resources, where officers, public officials, and public entities permanently account for the products, the results, because that forms part of communications, or the way in which we communicate, that the impact of activities with a systematic identification of their beneficiaries. And for that purpose, the institutional framework must be supported with the power of the state, but must also be legitimated. And that one way of achieving that legitimacy has to do with the definition of its own objectives. And if the achievement of these objectives responds to the need and the needs of citizens, and that is why I am so pleased to evidence the permanent interest on the part of the Ministry of Social Development in Honduras in terms of establishing these goals. When these goals are shared and are clear goals in terms of social protection and rights, that leads to this legitimacy in the community. And for that purpose, we need to make sure that these efforts are aligned, and so that we make an efficient use of available resources for us in terms of strategic governance, which forms part of one of the questions. This implies that these resources, not only in financial resources, but also human resources, are available in order to support social objectives. And this is also vital in order to guarantee social protection programs, enabling us to achieve this. But together with guaranteeing financial and human resources, what we also need is monitoring and evaluation, and this implies continuous supervision and evaluation of social policies, leading to the identification of social policies that are having a desired impact, those that are working and those that need to be improved. In our opinion, that is essential in order to upkeep the quality and the efficacy of a social protection system in our countries. I would like to again insist upon the fact that citizen participation is fundamental when we face these confidence crisis, and to make social programs legitimate. This must form part of the strategic governance, where the active participation of civil society, of communities, in decision making and in the implementation of social policies is also an element that guarantees the long-term sustainability of these policies, and that is a way of not falling behind or suffering from setbacks faced with changes in administrations. And since I am here in ECLAC, I would like to mention the role that I believe should be played by international cooperation, which in our opinion has and will continue to be fundamental, not only in terms of financial and technical support, but also in terms of the exchange of good practices. When I heard the fact that you're already sharing this, well, I believe that this is a fundamental role of international agencies, the promotion of legal regulatory frameworks, and also in terms of monitoring the quality of citizen participation, the targeting vulnerable groups, and the sustainable development of long-term social policies is undoubtedly something that we acknowledge, that we value, and that we have also experienced. And in terms of the role of UN agencies in our country. So I reiterate my gratitude for this invitation, which I repeat takes place in a very important and significant day for all of us and for our democracy. Thank you very much. Thank you, Senator Provoste, for your words, for your presence here, for allocating time in your agenda to be with us here today. We truly thank what you have said, and we can highlight many, many issues. It would take more than 3 minutes, but I would like to dwell on two issues. You spoke about assets and how important those assets of social cohesion and of legitimacy are for social protection policy. And you talked about issues that are in our position documents. That's so fantastic. Because, of course, when one talks about the resources that one has, so one talks about financial resources, but we need legal resources, technical resources, financial resources, and we also require human resource policies, because social development ministries require qualified staff in order to promote these transformations and reforms. Often these reforms and transformations obtain the resources, but when it comes to their implementation, well, there we find important deficits in our region, and therefore having that capacity and thinking about a sustainable social protection, as mentioned by Senator Provoste, implies investing in those dimensions. Well, that was 2 minutes. But in any case, we close the panel with Almudena, Chief Economist of the UNDP. Please, Almudena, you have 3 minutes. Thank you, Alberto. Very briefly, because I believe that my predecessors have already mentioned many of the reflections that we have made and many of the things in which we are working in the UNDP and what is present in the ECLAC document. But I would like to refer to the issue of social cohesion that the Senator has just mentioned. I believe that that is a fundamental issue. Perhaps it doesn't fall strictly within the mandates of social development ministries. It is, however, fundamental for your mission. And what we evidence in our region is that in the past few years, even before the pandemic, there was already a profound deterioration of social cohesion. We see that there are societies where there is less confidence in institutions and less confidence among the citizens, greater political polarization and fragmentation. And this has implications for many aspects of public and political life. It has implications, for example, in terms of how people vote, how people relate to each other. It also has implications for citizen security. And as mentioned by the Senator, in the sustainability of public policies and social protection policies specifically. So I believe that social cohesion is a fundamental cross-cutting issue. And the question that comes to mind is how we can be able to create those mechanisms to approach population, those spaces where different groups of the population can hold discussions that bring them closer. How we establish mechanisms to struggle against the lack of information that is increasingly spread through the social media. How can we regulate the information which leads to fragmented society? How we can strengthen public deliberation processes that is constructive in nature, that involves new agreements and new proposals, and not only contrasting opposition, and how we can reach the most vulnerable groups that tend to have a weaker voice in our societies. And something that came across in many of the interventions is that forms part of how we enter into agreements and reach the consensus that is necessary to generate public and fiscal policies that can guarantee the sustainability of social protection systems. This also implies, as was said, communication campaigns, data, how all this is communicated. So this is an additional area where how we build that social cohesion. It's important for us to share that experience. We have been sharing our experiences for several days now in terms of social policies, but what is also important is that many countries are doing a lot in this sense. For example, with the new technologies that involve misinformation in some cases, how we are also able to use it to build these spaces for public deliberation, helping us or leading to greater social cohesion. So I conclude with that. And I certainly thank you for enabling me to participate in this panel and to share my reflections. Thank you.
Muchas gracias.
Thank you very much, Almudena, for your closing words. And I also want to thank these excellent and distinguished panel members. I consider that we've had in this third day an excellent and big closure on panels for this regional meeting, where we have deepened up in our discussion in cooperation, strategic governance, and social protection. So please, now I will offer the floor to Minister Toro for the question from the audience. Thank you, Alberto, to all panel members. Interesting as well to go in a detailed kind of discussion. I want to invite now the different delegations who would like to talk. You can then show your hands or your country sign, so that the delegate from Dominican Republic. Thank you. I want to congratulate the panel that takes us to a spectacular closure. And I will express a reflection that goes in the lines that was expressed by Almudena and Jasna Provote. The social aspect is obviously the main pillar of democracy. The social aspect. We normally go around what is economy, in fact, which is not, in fact, economics. But it is only evidenced when there are crises, social crises in Latin America that can trigger other things based on the poverty. So the social aspect is central for public policies. And I think that all public policies are social policies. Controlling inflation is a social policy, yes, so that the people can buy at a normal price. Pensions as well as social policies as well, essentially social policy. And because of that, democracy then is questioned. And the different pendulum movements of Latin America is because of this social aspect that was not then well addressed, as we listened to yesterday from Argentina, and as President Lula was saying now, 20 years afterwards, I still go back and talk about poverty. If democracy then is questioned, our life as well is questioned, because after democracy, so far, will give road to authoritarianism, and we know about that. In Dominican Republic, we had 30 years of dictatorship that obviously it really destroyed many of our values, in fact. So there should be institutions such as those ministries of social development or social inclusion, etc. But those ministries should be powerful, considering that we need ministerial alliances for the purpose. As the minister from Honduras was saying, the difficult point for them was to convince the monetary fund that social investment was important, although possibly they didn't have the support of the Ministry of the Exchequer, as we can understand. But in all these dynamics, let's say, the social factors are kind of a negligible point. And politics matter, and it really matters. But social policies, I think, is much more important because people, this social cohesion which is needed, there's a better distribution of wealth, etc., is to have a more stable society that wouldn't question democracy, because without democracy, the problem becomes still worse. Thank you.
No hay más países.
If there are no other countries, Colombia. Good morning, everybody. My pleasure to listen to you, and along the lines with our colleagues from Dominican Republic, that was an excellent closure. But we're talking about mature institutions or institutionality, or that they have gone through a trajectory. Somehow they have been developed and they have come to a certain level of maturity. What happens, for example, with the new initiatives for strengthening this institutionality that implies the creation of new ministries? And I put this on the table because we are doing an internal exercise of seeing how the social institutionality has been going on. And without going backwards, because this is important to then to have a position, considering that while there are elements that allow us to talk with players promoting neoliberalism, it is also true that there are some patterns that are still kept, saying that a monetary transfer would then release, not overcome the precarious situations of the population. And those dialogues imply that we have to check where is the matrix of inequality. A country like ours, so much diverse, different ethnic peoples, we need to look and find this intersectionality. But not all institutions, not all entities of the state know how to implement this intersectionality. And we are in a key point, because not only we are demanded an institutional maturity for poverty, vulnerability, and other problems, but likewise, there are new problems coming. Migration, for example, is clear. Not only what happens in the Darien River, but there is a whole internal migration because of climate change, or because in their countries they do not find satisfaction and well-being conditions. And those are problems that demand an institutional adaptation to overcome them. But also, it is also true that the level of coordination and dialogue among the different entities is also required. And I have to say that we are progressing with the creation of a Ministry of Equality. But we cannot think that what has already been done does not matter. We are in to see how we can reduce inequality and to maintain policies that overcome poverty. But there are tensions in those conversations and dialogue, and divergence of focus. What would be the recommendation from ECLAC in order to overcome all these? They can come from an endogenous kind of source, but there might be other institutionalities under development to make these policies still more robust against poverty and inequality. I just wanted to take advantage of this room, not only to be happy and pleased for everything that I have learned. We always learned, despite complicated situations. We always learned. And I salute this room, obviously, and hopefully we can have the strength of these daily dialogues. We have to come to action. We need to be connected on a daily basis, technically, so that we can see how we can overcome this problem together. This is the opportunity to go deep in that. Thank you.
Vamos entonces con ONU Mujeres.
UN Women, thank you, Chair and Secretary. I second all this congratulations. It's an honor to be in Chile in this day, 35 years after the No. We were together with Mr. Salazar, with Paolo, in September 11th in La Moneda, the government palace, particularly because this concept of democracy was somehow reinforced. I think that the interventions of today, well, many of them are seconding what was the parallel event that we had yesterday. There was a Lux, in fact. We listened to Ministers Toro and others were talking about care, because good part of the response to the crisis of care is making that this new politics or policies, I would say, that put into articulation all that was done, but with a transforming vision with anti-racist visions as well, is those are new structures. They are not yet consolidated, but there is a political will and an exercise of institutional will, let's say. So those are three cases that are real good responses to the challenges presented by the pandemic. There is not enough maturity, but clarity on what to do and how to do it. And as Manuel Salazar was saying, there was some techniques with the emphasis on the perspective that will be transforming for this problem. In terms of the governance model, the experience of Peru and Honduras, they are just progressing in the local agendas of care, but they were talking about the 5 components of the systems of care that we have been positioning together with the CLAC and the consensus of Buenos Aires. We took the creation of services, regulation of services, and the working labors, the working conditions, sorry, the labor working conditions, the management of information in terms of public management and communication for cultural change, that many of you touched upon that, that allow transparency, accountability, etc. And the mechanisms of articulation that each country has is different or are different, but they break a good part of this pre-modern state that is not working to resolve the problems of today, and it requires leadership. Give them interministerial tabled boards, tables, etc. Different names in each different country, but they are articulating all this challenge that we have said from the first day when we talk about social policies in general. I think that this allows as well the dialogue with the citizens, as the senator was saying, and several of you, because this is an opportunity of a given voice to those who never had it. So not only because they were or they are into the more vulnerable groups, but they also represented today this challenge of integrating women, and also because they are in the territories. And my closing point is that you are given this level of of governance with the focus on the society of care. It's not only the economy of care, not only the service, but also this integral vision. And the roads have been different. We have listened to in the region, 3 different countries with this standardization frameworks, 6 bills. Argentina is one of them, where all the system of the United Nations have contributed, as well as in Panama, 35 strategies or policies of care which are under development. So the roadmap of Buenos Aires is being innovatively implemented. So we did a call yesterday that the next conference on social development, you were not, Alberto, but we wanted to include the care at the center of this conference. We will listen to this today, and today is one of the most important pillars of innovation of social policies. It's true that we have to have productive policies because it is a chain of value that are NMPs and organizations of the community that obviously they are just subject to the market laws, which is not helpful for us. And they do not have the condition of market in order to be significant in the system. And evidently, it is a part of social protection as well. And this is a good part of the cultural change that Latin America and the Caribbean are leading. So congratulations to the ministries and the directors here, because you're doing a change which is quite solid, that allow us to talk about inequality with a new pillar and that gathers all people. So polarization challenge that Almudena, you were talking about that, and how we can have spaces for deliberation for a sustainable peace. I think that your work in the territories with care allows states to have these dialogues in the territory, as Chile is doing, as Panama is doing as well. And to avoid this part of the polarization that is giving us a debate in the social media. If we continue working or debating in the social media, and then we're still going to deep up the lack of dialogue. We need to go deeper in the public policies, and the challenge is there. How you, the policymakers, they can have a good challenge and good dialogue with the society and the community. Thank you very much.
Por último, le vamos a dar la palabra.
Finally, we'll offer the floor to a representative from academia at the back there. Please introduce yourself. Hi. May you all have a very good morning. I represent a Peruvian university. We have there the first business and postgraduate school that was created in Latin America, and I've been working for more than 15 years there. And in this work, I educate public managers of public policies. And with that experience, I would like to tell you that I have paid great attention over the past 3 days to the presentations that you shared here. And I have some ideas that I would like to share with you as from academia. The first idea is that I haven't seen too many people here representing universities, and perhaps the participation of academia in this event has been scarce, but I believe it would be very relevant to have more representatives of academia in future meetings. The second thing I would like to say is that I have heard a lot about what we are doing with regards efforts to work on a social institutional framework, and in that process, countries have various experiences. But over the past 20 years, as far as I can see, we have made great progress in terms of being able to process a lot of information in order to read a reality and the social complexity before us. But I believe, based on the experience that we have in terms of the education of public managers and the advice work that I do, that we have 3 major areas of work for social work that involves important goals. First of all, to build the issue of social institutionality, not only in terms of the conception, the structure, and the institutional design within state entities. We also need to build and understand how to incorporate other stakeholders of this ecosystem and with what roles, levels, and capacities. We also need to understand that we can not only speak about institutions that are acknowledged, because there are many voices that are interacting and that have a strong collective power, and that they must be acknowledged. On the other hand, I also understand that the institutions that we are talking about and that we want to strengthen are also partly responsible for a whole series of processes that coexist in terms of the challenges of social development. And those are the processes that we would have to begin to analyze. And this is in the institutional infrastructure. I heard Javier Paulini from Peru, who spoke, well, yesterday I heard him in the working group saying that it had taken 20 years for Peru to build an information system, and yet they still don't have it at the level that they expect. The cost of learning that is very high. We need to learn quicker. But we must also understand that in the other workspace that where we act is people's capacities. So it is not only the institutional design processes, but also people. And in a discussion with a group of politicians in my country, we talked about what is most difficult to implement, the institutional design processes or people's capacities. And in this great discussion, we concluded by understanding that people transform the institutional design, people that transform processes, and therefore we have to emphasize that whenever we talk about participation and participation in decision making, we are talking of a level of inclusion where we find where we already have capabilities in place, and we cannot have a social institutional framework that is inclusive if we don't work on the development of the capabilities of people, not only in government institutions, but we also need to work on the capacities of civil society. And I would also like to understand that academia also needs to develop capacities, because those of us that were educated 20, 25, or 30 years ago, we faced a context of education with different tools and realities. Creativity must lead us to co-create a new way of understanding the social phenomenon and of understanding that aid has a short history, but the process of capacity building is permanent, is complex, and requires not only one sector in the state, but all sectors of the state. But it also implies that we need to understand how we're training professionals in academia to take on board these responsibilities as policy makers, because as Alberto said, we have policymakers and they're probably experts, but those that implement those policies may not have the capacity to implement them. I would like to mention an example. In Peru in 2017, we faced the El Niño phenomenon. Please, we have to bring this to an end in 1 minute. The idea was just to make a comment, not a presentation to the panel. So you have 1 minute so that we can move ahead. I'd just like to mention a clear example of institutional capacities. We created an authority to cater for the impact of the El Niño phenomenon that impacted 16 out of 24 departments in Peru. And they were allocated 10% of the national budget to that institution. However, 6 years have gone by and we have been unable to reconstruct the country. Now we face a new phenomenon, which is El Nino, the global El Nino, and we have a population that will be damaged even more than before. So these institutional capabilities of those of those that are putting this into operation is something that we have to understand, because it forms part of social development. That is what I wanted to say. Thank you.
Muchas gracias a todas las delegaciones por su
Thank delegations for all the interventions, and now we will have a 15-minute coffee break so that we can come back to the closing session. Thank you.
Bueno, retomamos entonces para en este
bloque
Okay,
considerar los acuerdos
we
que
now have to consider the agreements that we want to approve. So in accordance with our agenda, we now have to approve the agreements of this fifth conference, and I'd like to offer the floor to the secretary. Thank you, Chair. The first point comes from day one and has to do with the election of the presiding officers that will accompany Chile during the next 2 years. After several consultations and discussions, several delegations have approached the Secretariat to express their interest in forming part of this of these presiding officers. So I'd like to read the names of the presiding officers. Of course, chaired by Chile, that was elected on the first day, and then vice chair, Argentina, Barbados, Brazil, Costa Rica, Honduras, Panama, and Venezuela. If we agree, we will approve that. Delegate from Brazil. Okay, now we move on to the approval of the draft resolution that you know. You will remember the procedure that we conducted. We distributed this during the first day. We allowed delegations to make contributions for several hours, and we received contributions from Paraguay, Brazil, Colombia, Panama, El Salvador, Costa Rica, and Barbados, identified in the paragraphs that you will view and that are all supplementary to the texts that had been incorporated. And now the chair has mentioned an incorporation that Chile wishes to make, and I'll read this because we haven't been able to incorporate it. In paragraph 11, it says that the original paragraph that was stipulated on the first day, which is to add the following expression: we request the Secretariat to conduct a deeper analysis and identification of policy alternatives and financing standards to develop an institutional framework that is solid and an effective governance in decision-making processes related to social policies and to strengthen protection systems. In other words, it's exactly as it was before, but we add financing standards. So I consult delegations with the incorporations included by Paraguay, Brazil, Barbados, Costa Rica, Chile, El Salvador, and Panama, whether we are able to approve this resolution. Brazil. Thank you. Good morning, everyone. Secretary, Chair. We acknowledge the work of the Secretariat, and we approve the changes that have been suggested. Even this recent change proposed by Chile. We have a slight amendment for paragraph 7 that we have already discussed with the Secretariat during the short interval in order to clarify the underlying sense of paragraph 7 that refers to the support provided by ECLAC to the establishment of working groups. Simply to clarify that this is not a mandate. This mandate doesn't mean the indeterminate creation of working groups. And so in the third phrase, I would read that the way in which we propose. We request the Economic Commission for Latin America and the Caribbean that it provides technical assistance during the process of establishing working groups. And there the amendment would be existing working groups and those established by the conference or the presiding officers. After that, the paragraph continues as stated. Thank you very much. Thank you, Brazil. I imagine that we can accompany that text clarification. If so, Chair, please submit this resolution to the approval. The approval is up is submitted for approval. Yes, it is approved. Okay. Now, we will hear the presentation. Well, it's normal that in ECLAC meetings, civil society has a wide-ranging participation. And it's also common that at a given moment of the program, a presentation is delivered by civil society. So now Soledad Carbacho, acting, who will represent civil society, will read the declaration of civil society that met and organized and was coordinated in order to bring their position to the conference. Thank you. I would like to add that I am also chair of the National Coordinating Working Group for the Rights of the Elderly in Chile. For us, it's a great pleasure to share our declaration with you, the Declaration of Civil Society of Latin America and the Caribbean, when we bring to an end the fifth meeting of the Regional Conference on Social Development. I want to echo the words of Senator Proboste and to remember the plebiscite on the 5th October 1988 and its tremendous importance, not only for Chile, but for the whole Latin American and Caribbean region. Having said this, I would like to read our declaration.
To the government of Latin America and the Caribbean from civil society, we tell them that if we want to rethink the social contract in the region, it is urgent to guarantee the inclusion and equity based on the financing social production systems which are integral in nature. The respective sovereignty of our peoples implies the design of feasible alternatives and to not to continue being indebted based on progressive and fair tax system, as well as the control to avoid illusion and evasion and unilateral measures that would condition to the countries of the region. We understand the strengthening institutionality of agencies in charge of social development are based in a new social contract that will be present if the commitments are honored, if the information is said, if there is transparency and there is a guarantee of the fundamental rights of the vulnerable peoples. Strengthening and governance of the institutions require real spaces of participation of the organized civil society in decisions making, as established by the agreement to eliminate all ways of discrimination against women, 1979, the Declaration and Platform of Beijing, 1995, the Convention of Children's Rights, 1989, Inter-American Convention on the Protection of Human Rights of the Elderly, 2015, the Agreement of Escazú, 2018, the Convention of the Rights of the Disabled, 2008, the Program of Action of International Conference on Population Development in 1994, and the Consensus of Montevideo on the Population and Development, 2013. The Declaration and Durban Declaration 2001, the Declaration of the United Nations on the Indigenous Peoples 2007, the Covenant 2079 on the Indigenous Peoples 1989, and the Ibero-American Convention of the Rights of Young People 2015. The crisis generated by the pandemic exacerbated the economical and social problems that were in existence so far. According to worldwide figures between 2019 and 21, poverty increased from 24% up to 26.5%, and the perspectives of growth diminished this 2023 up to 1.4% in general terms. This shows the urgency of policies for inclusion and equity, eradicating all kinds of violence, discrimination, and oppression against the women, children, adolescents, the elderly, young people, migrant people, refugees, and defendants of territories and rights, LGBT community, sexual workers, the disabled, HIV people, and historically violent populations such as the indigenous peoples and the Afro-descendant communities. We have to phrase this impoverishment and the right for education and health. It requires acceleration of the 2030 agenda based on concrete actions and intersectorial agendas, as we said in the summit of the SDGs and during the General Assembly of the United Nations. So we call for social protection and decent work responding this crisis, which is a consequence of the concentration of wealth in few hands. Because of pandemic and did not improve after the pandemic. This is evidenced in the rate of unemployment, 7.5%, and growing informality that was 52.5 in 2019 up to 75% in 2023. That is to say, one out of the three workers are informal in Latin America, and they are working in very poor conditions. This affects the conditions of the life of our countries, particularly young people and women in all diversity, particularly those who are in charge of the household, particularly women, because it diminishes the economical power that they've had, and obviously it includes as well what happens to the aging population. Our proposal is to have a commitment to work together with the ministries and with policies of social protection to avoid the growth of unemployment. Likewise, we demand that the government would support directly the small producers, SMEs, and different actors linked to social and solidarity-based economy. It is urgent to see what the status and the mandates are for the different ministries of social development, as well as education and health, so that they can be efficient and quality-based. We need an initiative of a common financing, as today we insisted in the need of having more investment. Peoples require quantity and quality, as expressed in the joint declaration of civil society sent to the development banks, signed by more than 100 foundations, more than 50 countries. These budgets are insufficient for the integral welfare of people. Therefore, it is necessary that the state will assume the consensus of giving or given money enough to eliminate poverty, to eradicate poverty. The systems of social development, how to care for the plain access for the sexual rights and reproductive rights, services of sure abortion and all contraceptive methods. Those are still impeded in many countries of the region, impacting in the communities, particularly in the lives of children or girls, adolescents, and women in general. policies of care should be reinforced, as well as avoiding girls to be pregnant and to continue with their pregnancy. Our region has got the highest rate of young children or young girls being mothers, and maternal mortality is the third cause of death in the region. Likewise, 1 of 4 girls in Latin America and the Caribbean is forced to be for a marriage before 18 years old. Is the only region in which infantile marriages are not diminishing. The humanitarian crisis, which is progressive, goes for the immigrant populations and those without mobility. This is a human right, and migration can be an engine for social development of our societies. The governmental policies are repressive and restrictive against the migrating populations. The governments are reinforcing controls in the frontiers. They deport people massively. They separate families, and they detain people arbitrarily. When talking about rights, no one is illegal. Therefore, we call to guarantee these social, cultural, political, and economical rights to all persons without discrimination, regardless of their migrant condition. As a civil society, we are concerned for democracy, respect of human rights, and the strengthening of institutionality of the system for social protection. We demand giving information precisely and on a timely basis based on the knowledge of the territories and the key players, such as the case of the urgent inclusion of the organizations of civil society when making decisions and foreseeing the monitoring of the public policies. The absence of environmental justice in our countries is caused because of an extractivist method that is depriving the environment, putting all the mankind into jeopardy, increasing risks such as people trafficking and all kinds of modern slavery. We demand that we can transfer to clean and accessible technologies, green employment on an unequal footing, and the preservation of our natural resources. We demand special attention to the regions that present difficult conditions, such as Central America and the Caribbean, suffering the consequences of natural disasters because there is no policy for preventing that. Finally, we emphasize the importance of not continue being in debt, and international cooperation for development, which are basic in a moment of crisis worsened by pandemic under the risk of not complying with the SDGs related to inequality. A crucial issue is the insufficient of economical resources to guarantee the right of education, programs of social development. Countries give scarce budget for those programs which are necessary for the lives of our people. So we call these states to comply with the assumed commitments within the framework of Incheon Declaration in terms of the Assistance for Development, AOD. Civil society calls the government to action based on robust evidence to overcome the difficulties and challenges at a national level and a regional level as well, related to the health crisis, making these policies effective and considering preventive measures for attention, strengthening the institutionality that would contribute to have universal access to basic rights, particularly for the victims and the survivors of the different kinds of violence based on gender, paying attention to those who have been left behind. Only this way we can go forward for a just and sustainable future for all the people in the region within this framework of the 2030 agenda. Thank you.
Agradecemos la
We thank the reading of this declaration of the civil society that will be incorporated to the report of the meeting. Before going to the closing stage, I just wanted to say that in July this year, Paula Narvaez was chosen as the chair of ECOSOC, and she knows what the road towards the summit. But 30 years ago, Juan Somavia was chosen as well with the task of organizing the first meeting in Copenhagen. We have the opportunity of having him out of the program. Then I have to confess that it only 15 minutes ago we just knew about his presence here, so we offer the floor for him to tell us how was this meeting and how it can be projected.
Indeed, I was here. I was, we say here in Chile, just being a peeping Tom. And Luis came up to me and said what he has just said. So I said, well, I'll just speak for 5 minutes. But I have been listening to you all, and I congratulate you because I spent a good part of my life in civil society. Let me tell you what I feel, which is the following. Having listened to you, we all know it's easier to formulate policies than to implement policies. And what you have and are doing is indeed to talk about how to do this. You're talking about the how and not only the what. But you're doing this with a level of knowledge, of experience, and of capabilities to transmit what the reality of your own countries and what may be useful as from other perspectives. But what I felt most is that you were talking with endearment for the subject, that there was passion behind this, that you were convinced about this, and a tremendous awareness of the responsibilities that you have. And that, I must tell you, is not something that is ever present. So I thank you enormously, because my belief is that without passion, things are simply not done, without being fully convinced about them, because there are so many obstacles that one must have a very strong inner, a big inner strength to face up to this. So thank you very, very much for that. Now, that is a perspective that led us to mention something that was crazy in 1992, and that was, well, why couldn't we eventually, perhaps, if possible, hold a World Summit on Social Development? And in brackets, I would like to say that I was the first Chilean ambassador in the UN following the dictatorship. We didn't know, we weren't very aware of the international atmosphere, and we were told to be careful. But the first thing that we did was to propose a World Summit. I didn't ask for instructions, but it was accepted in any case. The idea was that we had to announce internationally that this was a political issue, and that is why presidents were there. This was not a discussion about the issues, but rather a discussion about the political outlook of this aspect, and that was very successful. It was the biggest meeting of heads of states in the UN at that time. That political issue is something that I also view as a challenge. The second issue was what already came across, in the sense that changes were of such a nature that we needed to have a vision related to sustainable development, and therefore we began to pave the way to advance in that direction. And the other thing was to say, well, look, today economic policies establish a framework for social policy, and we don't want that framework to be established, but rather to express that these are equally important, and therefore from the onset we must determine the interaction between these two aspects. There are many other issues, but I just mentioned those two because this relates to the challenges that lie ahead for us. One was mentioned at the end of the meeting, and it is that we are advancing with difficulties towards we're moving from representative democracies to participative democracies, saying, okay, I can elect, there is an institutional framework in place, but I would like very much not only to participate, but not only to be asked now and again what to do, because then I see that very seldom things that I have said are done, but I want to participate in the creation, in the implementation and the evaluation of what is done. And that process is underway, but that process leads us to the fact that if in the 95 conference we said, well, social aspects have the same weight as economic aspects, they have to be taken into consideration in the same fashion today. In the next summit, we must say that the social aspects are a priority. As we say, all policies are social policies, and therefore they are organized around the heart of things, which is people. The other aspect that I view as a challenge, and this is something that we were discussing with Minister Toro during the break, is that all the issues that we deal with in social policy and in policies in general are multidimensional. And in consequence, there is no aspect that we can deal with in an isolated manner. However, the knowledge of how we conduct an integrated policy is a knowledge that does not emerge from our educational processes, because professionally we're lawyers, engineers, architects, and so on. The government is organized in a sectorial fashion. The UN is also organized in that same fashion. And we concluded that we have to have integrated policies. And the truth of the matter is we have made progress with some of them. Multidimensional poverty, for example, or the gender issue has always been dealt with in a multidimensional perspective. But in general terms, we have no experience of integrated policies. And I believe that will be a key challenge for social policies taken as national priorities, because that is the priority of politics. And I conclude by saying that ECLAC will coordinate the regional commissions as from next year, and has a unique possibility. It is sufficiently aware of social aspects, and that is why we are already held 5 meetings. But what happens if ECLAC takes this to other regions, whilst in New York they prepare the summit of the future and so on? There could be a Latin American role in terms of mobilizing other regions so that by 2024 becomes a year for reflection, for the thought that has to be there with technicians and people that are knowledgeable of these issues, so that when political decisions are made, this is transferred to processes that are discussed in New York and so on. I also wanted to mention that, and I would like to conclude with what I said at the beginning. I feel very encouraged by this feeling with which you deal with these issues, because that is at the very heart of all this. I don't want to repeat myself, but I do want to emphasize that. So thank you very, very much for the spirit that comes across from you all in this room. Thank you. Thank you, Ambassador. Now we'll move on to the closing session. We thank the presence of Maria José Torres Macho, resident coordinator of the UN system, who is also with us here, and who will certainly, I believe, support Chile as the chair of this conference. First of all, for the president of the conference, the Minister of Social Development and Family Affairs of Chile, Javiera Toro, you have the floor. Thank you, everyone. I reiterate the greetings that we have conveyed during this conference. We are concluding this last day of the 5th Regional Conference on Social Development in Latin America and the Caribbean, and the 5th Ministerial Forum for Social Development in Latin America and the Caribbean. We have identified, and this morning this also came across, we have identified common challenges in order to have a strengthened a social policy institutional framework, which is what we began with in this conference with regards to the position document on institutional frameworks, international cooperation, intersectoral coordination, and national and subnational coordination of public policies as a key element when it comes to sustainable social policies, as was just mentioned by Juan Somavia. And in that sense, despite the fact that seems that we're all very aware of in ministries of social development and in practice is not so easy to implement when we have institutional systems that have become stagnated and for which it is difficult to work together. This is social systems and the one-stop shop that improves the interaction and the communication between the state and people, economic sustainability, capability to adapt, and this related to the crises that we are facing, the new challenges posed by climate change, and the various specificities that we all have. We have many countries with different characteristics, but we often face similar challenges. And finally, the comprehensive nature of our policies and moving towards universalization. Catering for these challenges is fundamental in order to deal with the challenges of the social reality of the region, structural inequality, progressive aging of the population, persistent gender gaps, migration crises, the effects of the COVID-19 pandemic, and the risk of going back at a regional level in terms of overcoming poverty. And I would like to dwell on one of the aspects that has been very substantive in this conference, and that we must discuss in greater depth during this period. And that has been to acknowledge the relevance of care in the agendas of our countries. Indeed, yesterday, in the side event, we held a very good discussion in this sense, which is also a contribution to this challenge. The efforts underway are a contribution, as from our region, to a problem which is global. And therefore, it is urgent to incorporate the lessons obtained from our experiences and to jointly determine how our systems contribute to greater social welfare, to greater autonomy for people, and to a better enjoyment of freedoms and rights. And we are building many things, and it's important to establish a dialogue to see how things are working and how they can be improved. Certainly, the tasks that this conference leaves for each one of our countries falls within the framework of a larger task to understand the relationship between social protection systems and the development strategies in our region, and that comes across in with very important clarity. As chair of this conference, I would like to acknowledge the excellent contribution of the various countries, the devoted support of the technical secretariat that over the years has made progress in the construction of a social protection, Latin American and Caribbean social protection paradigm. And in that sense, we have consolidated the basis and conceptual frameworks that move towards more inclusive societies. I suggest that we consolidate this commitment with a strategic approach, and this is reflected in our resolution that aims towards a common position when it comes to the universality and the comprehensive nature, providing an adequate response to the various vulnerabilities suffered by our peoples. And this implies going back to the new challenges and to the critical aspects that have been identified now for several years, not only to evidence them, but to promote new strategies that lead to better results without losing sight of the progress that has been achieved, and with the necessary participation of organized civil society that makes very important contributions to this experience. And I highlighted the need for these new strategies and of being open to participation, because in a scenario of various crises and when social compacts are weakened, confidence between people and institutions is not a given condition, but rather in permanent construction. And we require a revitalization of that social confidence to uphold the common efforts that are necessary in order to strengthen our social protection systems, showing that national and regional efforts can lead to concrete improvements in the daily lives of people. And along those lines, I would truly like to congratulate the agreements of this session. And as from this, we will work to consolidate this consensus considering the World Summit in 2025. The exchange of experiences and cooperation is fundamental in that sense. And I fully trust that if we maintain an open debate and critical learning between countries, we will be able to enhance our common ideas and achieve our objectives. We are very pleased whenever, as high authorities, we participate in these events. Latin America and the Caribbean is a region that has a common present and a common future. And that is especially relevant faced with the questioning of democracy and the weakening of the social compact. Regional coordination and certainly the role of international entities are fundamental in order to safeguard the progress that has been achieved in terms of social protection. Finally, I would like to especially thank ECLAC, represented today by Alberto Arenas, for its enormous support to this conference and acknowledge the valuable work of his team. And of course, the UNDP that has been so important in jointly organizing these conferences together with the Ministerial Forum, the organizations of civil society for their participation, for their contributions. And I would also like to thank the Ministry of Social Development and Family. I was recently in another ministry, the Ministry of Social Development and Family Affairs, for their commitment that will also facilitate the commitments that we have entered into during this conference. And we have two of our undersecretaries here, and in general terms, the whole professional team that accompanies us. And of course, the commitment of Argentina, Barbados, Brazil, Costa Rica, Honduras, Panama, and Venezuela, who today become presiding officers. I also commit a responsible leadership that we will be able to exercise together. So may you have a safe trip home. Thank you for coming to our country. We're very happy to welcome you here and see you again in a next meeting of this conference. Thank you very much.
Muchas gracias, Presidenta.
Thank you very much, Chair, the General Director of Latin America and the Caribbean of UNDP, sorry. Thank you, and good afternoon so far. Javiera Toro, Ministry of Social Development, Family in Chile, and President, Chairwoman, Alberto Arenas, from Director of the Social Division of ECLAC, Soledad Carvacho, representative of the civil society, Juan Somavia, Maria Jose Torres Macho, the resident coordinator in Chile of the system of United Nations honorable ministries, delegations, colleagues, friends. On behalf of UNDP, I would like to start my words I reiterate in my thankfulness to our cooperators and friends of CEPAL, of ECLAC, and the governments of Chile for the leadership in the organization of this important conference. And as they are our distinguished guests, hosts, sorry, during these days we've had the privilege of listening and dialogue over the common challenges that the regional countries are facing in an environment of uncertainty. We have seen experiences, we have learned different practices in the systems of social protection and inclusion to progress for a better human development, which is the final objective that we all have. The presentations of the panel members and the intervention from the delegations have evidenced the multiple challenges present in the region for policies and systems of universal social protection that would be agile and resilient. This meeting has given us a space for reflection and dialogue, given relevance to cooperation, mutual learning, and commitment to progress in a joint agenda, and to strengthen our alliances and our linkages as a region. The challenges that we are facing are complex, but through the collaboration and collective intelligence, we can develop innovative solutions and to build a more equitable and sustainable future for all of us in our region. Let me reiterate very quickly 5 messages that for us come out of this conference. First, to advance into universality, we need to go from fragmented programs to progressive guarantees along life, and we require the strengthening and reformulation of the mandate are required in the ministries of social development, and the increase of their capacities for management is fundamental to increase and to improve the care policies, fostering productivity, particularly in women, and inclusion of the more vulnerable groups of society. Second, systems of information are a basic pillar for the focalization and effectiveness of social policies. Without them, it is difficult to reach the vulnerable population, giving them good results and the measurements as well of the impact of the public policies. And 3, the cost of inaction is very, very high within a context of going back or setbacks in terms of poverty and inequality. More of the same will not be enough. It's important to establish sustainable mechanisms for financing public policies. And it's also necessary to involve the entrepreneurial sector and other relevant players in the civil society for social development. Particularly in the context of high uncertainty and risk, it is necessary that this system of social protection would have the capacity of anticipating and adapting themselves to different shocks to protect the vulnerable populations. We need information which is updated with capacities to respond on a timely basis to the different emergencies. And lastly, we have to progress towards more inclusive and fair systems of social protection, and this is not possible without increasing financing. Making sure financial sustainability goes hand in hand with new fiscal pacts and an efficient management of the resources. Let me allow to close this by congratulating ECLAC because of this social institutionality in the Caribbean and Latin America, and these lines given in terms of norms, organization, technical, and organizational and financing, things which are highly relevant as tools for strengthening the institutionality of the Ministries of Social Development and the formulation of public policies, allowing to progress towards a more inclusive social development. All these guidelines will for sure be quite useful to advance in our common objectives. Once again, thank you very much to be with us here in this 15th Forum of Social Development. Your intervention, reflections, comments give us a clear panorama of the challenges, but also of opportunities to progress towards sustainable development in the region. Thank you very much, and good trip back home.
Gracias, Linda.
Thank you, Linda. And to conclude, Alberto Arenas de Mesa. I'm sorry. Thank you very much. Good afternoon to everybody, and particularly my greetings to Javier Toro, Ministry of Social Development and Family of Chile, and President of this regional conference. Linda Maguire, um, the head of the UNDP in Chile, ministries and authorities of social development of the countries of Latin America and the Caribbean, Maria Jose Torres Macho, the resident coordinator of the United Nations in Chile, Soledad Carvacho, and through her, the representatives of all the representatives of civil society that accompany us today, Ambassador Juan Somavia, the representatives of the diplomatic diplomatic pool, and the agencies of the United Nations, colleagues of ECLAC and the Secretary of the Commission, Luis Yañez. Dear people, then by closing this 15th meeting on the social development of Latin America and the Caribbean, I would like to thank all the authorities of social development and the countries of the region for the work done in those intense 3 days and quite motivating exchange of ideas that we've had. I want to thank particularly Minister Javier Toro and her team of the Ministry of Social Development, the undersecretaries, because of all this leadership, dedication, and deliverance in all these meetings that were organized all together with the program the program of development of the United Nations, UNDP, that is celebrating as well this 15th meeting of development. The member countries for their active participation in coordinating and implementing the works of the regional agenda on social development. And the organizations of the civil society and all the representatives, because of the active participation in the different activities and working meetings, and for the spirit of cooperation that has been developed here. I want to thank the opinions and reflections of the countries in terms of the first document that we delivered from ECLAC for this conference. And once again, I want to thank Linda Maguire and the whole team of the UNDP with whom we organized this 5th meeting. As we highlighted at the beginning of the week, this 5th meeting of the regional meeting on social development is inserted in to our judgment in a route of actions that will define a map of actions. In the document, our common agenda, the Secretary General of the United Nations did a call to multilateralism, inclusive one, interconnected and efficient, to respond better and to offer results to people and the planet, and so that the world can retake the actions for sustainable development. And in the document, there is a formulation of a possibility of having a World Summit in 2025. And I think effectively that this meeting is on the road towards this summit 2025, and the deliberations that we've had in this 5th meeting increase our conviction that the regional conference on social development of Latin America and the Caribbean can work as a platform, privileged platform, to take the voice of the region to this World Summit. In 2025, there will be 30 years out of the Summit of Copenhagen. And it is one of the biggest meetings on social development of the world leader ever done. And the government approved a declaration and a program of action, representing a new consensus in terms of how central people are for development. And this has been the guidelines for the multilateral development. This declaration of the Copenhagen 1995 was a hallmark, and it was putting the emphasis on eradicating poverty as a political, economical, etc. factor. eradication of poverty, creation of productivity, and inclusion of the social development. But this cannot be done only by the social actors, but through initiatives which are collective in nature. And one of the things that we have touched upon in this fifth meeting of this regional meeting is it's important to go out of this conference and to have more players to go for this development, which is to be inclusive. This agenda, approved in 2019, the third meeting, approved by you, the member countries in Mexico City, was the basis for the work done in this conference. This agenda was based in 4 pillars. First is the system of social protection, universal and integral. Second is the policies of labor and social inclusion. Third, the inclusion of the productivity. And we have centered ourselves in the third axis, which is institutionality. Advancing towards this needs to have universal and integral, sustainable and resilient these systems, together with big social contracts, given protection, given certainty, reliance, and guarantees financing for this system. Then we can build a solid road towards this inclusive social development. But to have this path done, we need also to define a standard of public expenditure in the system of social protection, and particularly, as we have talked it over here, standards of the public system, but the non-contributed one in the region, the one who cares for inequalities and poverty. Following the experience of other sectors such as education, health, and culture, it is a regional challenge with cross-cutting agreements from the different countries that we will support from ECLAC. And therefore, from this meeting, we need to promote research and studies to facilitate the building of a relate that will express the financial dimension that we have been talking about here, with the purpose of coming to the necessary standards of financial sustainability for poverty eradication and reduction of inequalities. So the ministries of social development could be able to implement public policies of quality in the region through the promotion, protection, and guarantee of the whole set of the different rights of people. The work done in these 3 days was not possible without the commitment of the unit of social development of ECLAC and all people that work there, together with the office of the secretariat of the commission and the support of the unit of a conference of public information, etc., from ECLAC. In these 3 days of work, we have come to good results, listening good contributions with several side events related to this social development. In the 5 different panels, the debate was very interesting and enriching. In panel 1, first day, we proposed rethinking the social pattern with inclusion and equity, financing of the universal system in Latin America and the Caribbean, leading a debate where the challenges of these different systems and the need of a social pact to guarantee sustainability were then addressed. In panel 2, mandates and structure of the ministries of social development, improving the capacities of the social institutionality. Multiple elements were highlighted. First, requirements from the ministries different ministers are urgent. So we needed to have a better institutionality. And second, to adopt a strategic perspective strategy to harmonize the mission of the different factors that are needed for the organization. Third, invest in technology and human resources, which is key to give adequate attention to people. And three, this articulated institutionality and the possibilities of a single window, the effort to promote inclusiveness and amicable services towards human rights and diversity were addressed. Panel 4 is decision-making for assessment. There is the need of unifying the information to have a national integrated systems interoperable to simplify processes, avoiding duplicity, and to protect adequately the data from people. And finally, this morning, we have talked about social institutionality, strategic governance, and cooperation in crisis. So this well-defined and solid institutionality gives a framework for effective governance, and for this governance, it will contribute to have a social institutionality by generating trust and legitimacy in the trajectory of those policies. I want to thank because of the welcoming of the document that we have delivered to you at the beginning, and the one that we have called a second stage, and we're convinced about that, which is a pillar which is basic towards our goal that was reaffirmed by the resolutions of this meeting, and commitment of disseminating it the best as we can. We want to congratulate finally your enthusiasm as countries to participate here in this conference. From now on, we have 8 vice presidency, the cooperation of Argentina, Barbados, Brazil, Costa Rica, Honduras, Panama, and Venezuela, which obviously will be working with the chairmanship of Chile. Our success, our wishes of success, a work that we as CLECLAC are committed to give you all contributions possible. We want to thank the offering from Barbados to be hosting or to host next meeting in 2024, in Brazil to receive us as a venue in the next chairmanship in 2025. I want to thank the work of all the authorities of social development and the delegations and the participants of the civil society and agencies of the United Nations, and the cooperation all along these 3 intense days. One of the ministers who says it was an intense work done, particularly to the Ministry of Social Development of Chile. We wish them a good trip back home. Hopefully then you can go back to your home, to your houses safely, and be sure that we will be consolidating strategies to progress towards this sustainable development, which is a fundamental part of the sustainable development of the region. Thank you very much.
Bueno, gracias, Alberto.
Thank you, Alberto. Thus, we bring to a close this conference, and I suggest that we give a warm hand to Alberto Arenas because it's his birthday today.